Chapter 676, Are They Human? 2 kilometers away from them, Jia Weili, who brought his 2 trusted men and hid behind a mountain boulder, observed the scene midair in the distance through binoculars. He could clearly watch the scene of the intense and bitter fight between Daoist Qianquan and Old Blind. Experienced and knowledgeable he may be, yet the scene was so daunting that he was frightened. Are they still human? Or some supernatural beings? Jia Weili used to disdain the idea of gods, ghosts, and the likes away from his mind. But that intense combat scene midair was akin to a combat between celestial beings. It made him have no choice but to believe that there really was something in the world he did not understand. At this moment, he finally understood why Tang Xiu asked him to hurriedly rush over to this place to notify his men, and even told him it was likely that he would have a hairbreadth escape situation. That was because what he must face was not ordinary people. Those people, each and every one of them, could claim his life with a flick of their fingers. What's the situation, Brother Jia? His 2 men did not bring binoculars, so they were naturally unable to see the intense combat a while ago. One of them stared at Jia Weili's palpitating expression and asked with a curious face. Jia Weili turned his head with difficulty to look at his curious face and then replied bitterly, I'm afraid we're of no use at all. Even if we go there, there won't be anything we can do and we'll only meet our death. So, what are we gonna do? Asked the man quickly. Jia Weili fell silent for a moment and then whispered, We'll wait here. Since Tang Xiu asked us to come to notice them in advance, it means that he will come over as well. Everything is to be put on hold, and then we'll discuss this again after he arrives. Outside the cave. Daoist Qianquan was holding Jin Sijie's arm as he quickly checked his injury after putting him on the ground. He did not go after Old Blind because the ultimate trump card he blustered out was just a bluff. He had been injured, and it was a very serious injury at that. Although he was confident that it was not as serious as Old Blind's, yet he would only stimulate that old woman to stake everything with her life on the line if he kept pursuing, and he might also perish with her. He did not want to die yet. Especially after finding out that there was an immortal trove in this place. He wanted to break through to the nascent soul stage, continuing his lifespan for a few hundred years more. We need to recuperate. There was blood gushing out in his throat, but Daoist Qianquan forced it back inside. After he took Jin Sijie and carried him on his back, he shouted in a hoarse voice. Jin Sijie's internal organs were in a mess after Old Blind sneak attacked him with the Buddhist bead. He was now in a crisis, and his life would probably be in danger if he did not have a timely treatment. Luckily, Tang Xiu gave him a holy healing medicine, and its efficacy had yet to be fully absorbed. After sitting cross-legged on the ground, he did not hurry to cultivate but rather spoke in a hushed breath, Master, those 4 bastards, their swords are definitely not magic weapons. I suspect that they are spirit weapons. Else, with their early foundation establishment stage cultivation, it would be impossible to severely injure me even if they did employ a sword formation. Spirit weapons? A greedy light flashed in Daoist Qianquan's eyes. But then he suddenly realized something and his expression turned nasty. If Tang Xiu's men possessed spirit weapons, then what rank could his weapon be, considering that his status was even higher? Immediately, he grabbed Jin Sijie's arm again and shouted in a deep voice, Don't cultivate here, let's leave this place immediately. We don't know when that surnamed Tangpunk will be back here. Let's find a safe place first and then heal ourselves. In the next morning, Tang Xiu led Mo Ao and 5 other experts out of the Kana's airport exit. Ridden with worries inside, Tang Xiu did not catch a taxi but quickly asked around where the unlicensed taxis usually hung around. Hey, buddy. Do you need a ride? More than a dozen unlicensed taxis were parked on the roadside. Some of the drivers wore bearded faces, and among a group of fierce-looking middle-aged men, one of them came to greet them. I need 2 cars. But I'm going to buy them. Name your price, said Tang Xiu in a deep voice. The more than 10 bearded middle-aged men exchanged looks in wonderment. It was a situation they had never encountered in their many years of the unlicensed taxi business. The full-bearded middle-aged man who just greeted them hesitated before he stretched out a finger and said, 100,000. I'll sell this van to you. Tang Xiu had planned to buy cars for temporary use after he got off the plane, and even had stuffed hundreds of thousands of yuan in cash into his travel bag from the stash inside his interspatial ring. The bag was now carried by Mo, and after he heard the price quoted by the middle-aged man, Tang Xiu then nodded to Mo. Mo opened the travel bag's zipper and took out 10 stacks of 100 yuan bills from it, a total of 100,000 yuan, and then handed it over to the middle-aged bearded man. Key. The pupils of the middle-aged bearded man contracted, and the other unlicensed taxi drivers looked shocked. The way they looked at Tang Xiu's group was now different than before at this moment. If it was not for the fact that Tang Xiu's group consisted of 6 men and did not look like they were ordinary people, they would have tried to rob them. It's yours. The middle-aged bearded man grabbed the money with a pleasant surprise. After checking the money and determining that they were genuine bills, he gave the key to Mo happily. His van was worth at most 40 to 50,000 yuan, and though the meters it had run was less than 10,000 kilometers, selling it for 100,000 yuan was definitely a big profit in and of itself. A few hours later, Mo drove the van and arrived at Longquan Swamp. The group left the car and quickly trekked up the mountain range and, without long, they had arrived outside the cave where Western nefarious Sangha used to occupy previously. There are traces of a fight here, boss. And it should be traces left by cultivators. Mo directly reported to Tang Xiu after he and the others scoured and inspected the vicinity. Tang Xiu's face looked a bit ugly as he quickly entered the cave. He could not find the shadows of Jin Shi's group of 4 at all except for bloodstains left outside the cave and the scene left behind, after the fight. One must know that Jin Shi's group of 4 were core experts of the Everlasting Feast Hall and the talented ones whom Gu Yan had fostered and trained personally. It would be quite a big loss for him and the Everlasting Feast Hall if they were all killed. Jin Sanqi, Jin Sijia, you all fucking bastards. This father spared your lives because you two did not offend me directly. Had I known that you had such a sinister an idea, I would have completely killed you then. Tang Xiu was somewhat annoyed with himself. He found that he had turned a lot softer inside ever since he returned to Earth. Was it because of the law, or did I get influenced by others, or was it the feelings of affection from my family? But then again, weeding out grasses without removing its roots will only leave endless troubles in the future. Then, in the future, as long as they are enemies, just kill them all. Tang Xiu's eyes turned a bit red. He had searched both caves, and there was still no trace of Jin Shi's group of 4. Boss, someone is coming. Just as Tang Xiu came out of the cave where the herbs were planted, Mo whispered to him while holding mini binoculars. Who is it? Asked Tang Xiu in a deep voice. It's a bit far distance, but they should be ordinary people since their speed is not fast, answered Mo. No. I can see them now. It's Jia Weili with his 2 men. They are coming here. Tang Xiu's expression changed, and then he instructed Mo and the others to immediately greet them. When he saw the distressed but unhurt Jia Weili, he cupped his fists and said, Brother Ji, I won't say thanks to you, but you can be sure that Tang Xiu will always record this huge favor in my mind. Just open your mouth if there's any request you need of me in the future. Jia Weili's expression looked a bit complicated as he looked at Tang Xiu for a while, and then let out a bitter smile as he said, Who exactly are you, Brother Tang? Tang Xiu was silent for a while and asked, Why the question? I saw the intense and bitter fight between those people last night, said Jia Weili. Those people were like those the celestial beings and immortals in legend. They can fly in the sky and fight in midair. The means they showcased were absolutely not the kind that normal humans can do. So you should know what I'm asking about, Brother Tang. You said that you witnessed the fight last night. What exactly happened last night? And who were fighting? Asked Tang Xiu hurriedly. Jia Weili could not wait for Tang Xiu's reply, but after he saw the urgency and anxiousness in Tang Xiu's tone and expression, he suppressed his confusion and seriously said, I saw an old Taoist and an old woman fighting in intense combat. I also saw an old man in a man-eating fight with 4 young men. That's right. Those 4 guys are your men. Then what happened to them? What was the outcome of the combat? Asked Tang Xiu in a rush. That old lady brought your 4 men and fled, whereas that old Taoist and another old geezer stayed in the cave over there for a while before leaving. Jia Weili shook his head. We were very far away from them and only saw through binoculars. So I don't know where they went. An old Taoist and an old woman? Tang Xiu frowned deeply. Little did he expect that 2 people would appear in the incident all of a sudden. If that old man was Jin Sanqi or Jin Sijia who fought Jin Shi's group of 4, then it could only mean something, that the strength of these old codgers was inferior to that old Taoist's. After pondering for a while, Tang Xiu asked again, Brother Jia, I'll answer that question of yours later. Please remember carefully. Other than my men, was there any special physical characteristics on the others? Jia Weili thought for a while and then suddenly remembered something as he quickly said, that old Taoist looked very ordinary, and he did not have any special characteristics. But that old woman was actually a blind person. That's right. Though I don't know how she could see, there was definitely something wrong with her eyes. Old blind? A person suddenly crossed Tang Xiu's mind. It was Old Blind who he once met in Shanghai's Everlasting Feast Hall before. Could it be her who acted to save Jin Shi and the other 3? Tang Xiu took out a half-pack of cigarettes from his pocket, lit one, and then took 2 deep puffs. After which, he looked at Jia Weili and asked, Were you late when you came here, Brother Jia? Jia Weili forced out a smile and said, I indeed arrived late. We just arrived in the vicinity and found some people in an intense fight. Brother Tang, you did not see it, those scenes were like. Brother Jia, you must never disclose anything about what you saw last night, interrupted Tang Xiu. Since you want to know our identity, then I'll no longer conceal it from you. We all are cultivators who have been cultivating special cultivation techniques and thus have special abilities as well. Only, people like us are not exposed to the public and ordinary people, neither will we expose ourselves. Chapter 677, Moving Fast to Kill. Jia Weili was not a stranger to the cultivator term. He did not experience it himself, however, since he could see examples from many TV series and soap operas containing episodes about cultivators. Only, finding out that cultivators also existed in reality shocked him nonetheless. Can I cultivate and step into the Tao, Brother Tang? He had seen the powers of Taoist Qiankuan, Old Blind, and the others, and was particularly interested in the scenes of flying into the sky, sword lights, and sword images. Every man had their own dreams of martial arts chivalry, more so that stepping into the Tao and becoming cultivators was something more abstruse and inclined more to fantasy than martial arts, something he couldn't help but feel moved. You're too old and no longer suited to cultivate. Tang Xiu shook his head. Even if you consume a lot of resources and time, I'm afraid that you can only barely step into the threshold of the cultivation path in the latter half of your life. Hence, it won't have much difference if you cultivate or not. A regretful expression could be seen on Jia Weili's face as he slowly nodded and said, Let's just forget it, then. Then, what are we gonna do? Continue staying here or? Let's go to Longquan village. Tang Xiu pondered for a while. This place is not far from that place. We'll stay there, for now. I'll contact that old blind lady. Brother Jia, it's best for you not to stay for long in Longquan Bay since the matter I'm going to face is very dangerous. I know. I have my own discretion, replied Jia Weili with a bitter smile. But you must not recklessly throw yourself into danger either, and quickly retreat whenever it's dangerous. Like an old adage says, you won't have to worry about running out of firewood in the mountains, for you still have much more time in the future. You can develop and grow yourself first before dealing with the enemies. You can rest your worry on that. Tang Xiu nodded with a smile. Now that he learned that his men had been rescued, he could finally feel the knot in his heart ease. Nevertheless, he must find Old Blind and Jin Shi's group of 4 as quickly as possible, because Jin Sanqi and Jin Sijia were powerful and strong, more so that mysterious old Taoist was not a friend either. As night came, Tang Xiu and the others rushed to Longquan Bay. After Jia Weili and his men left, Tang Xiu stayed in the locals' farmhouses he used before and gave its owner a sum of money to let their families stay in some other places for a few days. Boss, everything's here. Mo Ao walked in through the door with a handful of incenses. Tang Xiu took 3 of them, used a lighter to burn them, then looked around and shouted, "Old Blind, Old Blind, Old Blind." In the mountain range dozens of kilometers away, Old Blind was sitting cross-legged on a creek with a face pale like a sheet of paper. The running water rushed past her and yet she did not pay attention to it. Her eyebrows were tight, and a pained expression could be seen hanging on her face as traces of a bloodstain were still on the corners of her mouth. Around her, Jin Shi's group of 4 watched the surroundings with vigilance and they had set up many traps. Although these traps did not pose any threats to cultivators, they could still avoid the attacks from ordinary wild animals. They had taken a holy healing medicine each and was no longer burdened by their injuries. Puff. Suddenly, Old Blind spurted a mouthful of blood and her face looked a lot better as the stench of fumes rapidly dissipated. She then slowly raised her hand and waved at Jin Shi several meters away from her. "You called me, senior?" asked Jin Shi respectfully. "I never expected that the holy healing medicine you gave me had such a good effect," sighed Old Blind. "That old fogey Qiankuan gave me quite a heavy injury. I thought I would be plagued by that injury for a year and a half, but most of my internal injuries have convalesced in just nearly a day. If anything, you must tell me something. I need to figure out when that Tang Xiu kiddo will come." "What do you need to know, senior?" asked Jin Shi, looking puzzled. Old Blind let out a faint smile and was about to speak when her expression slightly moved. When she looked up at the sky that was gradually darkening, her body languidly stood up as she shook her head and said, "There's no need anymore, I already know where he is. Let's go and rush over there. It won't take much time to get there if we leave now." The dimly illuminated night was over the earth when Old Blind's group of 5 arrived at Longquan village. A crescent moon was hanging high over the horizon and the cold breeze brought along the mixed fragrance of a meal. In the most remote courtyard, an 8-person table was set with delicious dishes and 2 bottles of God's nectar, taken out from the box that had already been served on it. To think that I, Old Blind, would be so lucky to get something nice to eat here. A blurred figure floated into the courtyard along with a satisfied laughter and tone. After Tang Xiu saw Old Blind, his eyes swept Jin Shi's group of 4 behind her and chuckled with a smile. He then took out 3 wine glasses and opened a bottle of God's nectar and then poured it into 3 glasses. Following that, he took the 3 wine glasses and offered them to Old Blind, saying, "I may not say thanks for this favor, but I'll let the wine speak my gratitude. You've rescued these 4 brothers, men of mine, and Tang Xiu will always remember this friendship in his heart. I also repeat the promise I gave you, the 9 Dragons Island's door will always be open wide to you, forever." Old Blind nodded with satisfaction. Even though she was old, she drank all 3 glasses of wine in one breath and in high spirits. Following which, she sighed and praised, "What a unique and excellent wine this God's nectar is. For I, this Old Blind, it would really be worthwhile if I were to leave Earth after being able to taste such an excellent wine in this life. I'll always prepare it for you if you like it, senior," said Tang Xiu with a smile. "Forget it." Old Blind waved her hand. Wine is akin to poison for intestines, and I still want to live a few years longer, so don't mention about it, keto. Also, I'm not used to people calling senior this and senior that. Just directly call me old blind later. This, Tang Xiu looked a bit hesitating. Just leave out that over-courteous formality, and so shall it be, said old blind. Anyways, let's eat something, and then we'll speak about the matter with that old fogey Daoist Qiankuan after being full, shall we? Old Daoist Qiankuan? Tang Xiu's expression moved. Then, he invited old blind to take a seat and accompanied her to finish the meal. As the meal was cleaned and the 8-person table was also moved into the house, Tang Xiu then spoke, previously. You spoke about an old Daoist Qiankuan, right? What is his relationship with Jin Sanqi and Jin Sijie? While rubbing her stomach, old blind replied with a cheerful expression, they are master and disciples. Jin Sanqi and Jin Sijie are the disciples of this Daoist Qiankuan old fogey. Tang Xiu's complexion changed and asked again, I've been here before and met Jin Sanqi and Jin Sijie. I spared their lives due to a momentary benevolence. But, that old Daoist Qiankuan wasn't there. He just broke the seal I cast on him, so how could he possibly appear before? Old blind sneered. If anything, this old blind will be open to you about this fact. He and I have a long-time enmity. It was he who cast his eyes on my family heritage at first. He killed my father and all my family members for that. Later on, I studied the divination art heritage of my family and, after spending quite the effort both in mind and energy, I finally succeeded in arranging a starlight array in the abstrusine ground and trapped him there. I thought it was impossible to escape that place with his golden core stage cultivation, but he did indeed escape. Tang Xiu was taciturn as he quietly thought about the revelation. After noticing some issues, he then asked, according to what you said, Daoist Qiankuan was not your match in the past, so why didn't you defeat him last night? I used all the cards I have up my sleeves at that time, and he got suppressed because he looked down on me before. He did not even unleash his ultimate trump card, else it could have been me who died, sighed old blind. Tang Xiu, do you know how many years that old Daoist has been living? Isn't he from the same era as you? Asked Tang Xiu, astounded. He is at least twice older than me. Old blind shook her head. Twice her age. Tang Xiu's countenance slightly changed. He still clearly remembered old blind's age. She should be about 120 years of age. With that said, shouldn't Daoist Qiankuan's age be at least 240 years old? No wonder his strength was so formidable. Old blind, you're not his match at all, so what is his present level of cultivation now? His cultivation in the past was peak golden core stage, and it was highly likely that he would break through to the nascent soul stage in the future. However, I had him suppressed in the abstrusine ground for so many years, and this time that I met him again, I found that his strength is much weaker than it was previously. The level of power he can unleash is just at the early golden core stage, else I could have lost my life in his hand last night. Early golden core stage? A cold glint flashed in Tang Xiu's eyes. In the case that Daoist Qiankuan's strength was at the peak golden core stage, he would be unable to contend with him despite his present strength. But if he was at the early golden core stage, he would be able to kill him, albeit with some difficulty. Old blind, I want to know where Daoist Qiankuan is now. Old blind slightly furrowed her brows. Although her eyes could not see Tang Xiu, her special ability allowed her to see his expression clearly. She then shook her head and sighed, exterminating him while relying on these few people you brought will be very difficult. Just wait until my injury has fully recovered. We'll join forces and kill him at that time. There's no need to wait, said Tang Xiu with confidence. If I have the guts to look for him, it means that I have the ability to kill him. Just tell me. Old blind hesitated for a moment, and then replied helplessly, since you've already decided it so, then I'll tell you. That place is full of evil chi aura and is located in the southwest direction. It isn't far from here, about 50 kilometers. Southwest direction within 50 kilometers? Is it the hunting grounds? Tang Xiu's expression moved, as he immediately got up and said, "Old blind, just stay here to take care of your injuries and heal well. I'll be back bringing Taoist Shenkuan and his 2 disciples' heads. I'm going with you." Old blind got up, and her tone was exceptionally firm. "But your injury," Tang Xiu hesitated. "Your men gave me a holy healing medicine, thus it's better already now." Old blind interrupted him. "In contrast with that Shenkuan old fogey, I'm sure he's feeling unwell now since he doesn't have a holy healing medicine. Let's go together, then." Seeing old blind's firmness, Tang Xiu no longer refuted. Jia Weili had left with his men and left them a Wrangler SUV. Added with the van, the 2 cars quickly rushed toward the hunting grounds. Late at night. A cold wind was howling and whistling outside the window, but the darkroom was warm as in spring. The old Taoist Qiankuan was sitting cross-legged on the bed treating himself, while Jin Sanqi's eyes were full of killing intent in the next room, watching Jin Sijie in the process of healing himself. The hatred he had for old blind, Tang Xiu, and even his men had been carved deep into his bones. The plan they had worked for so many years had ultimately fallen through. His master appeared and yet was burdened with severe injuries upon his return. This hatred drove him to make up his mind to find an opportunity to torture and kill Tang Xiu. Torture and slaughter those stupid bastards that prevented him from becoming an immortal. Chapter 678, Great Exhibition of Martial Prowess. Inside another 2-story small building, Gesangjer, who was donned in a jersey, stood by the window with arms folded in the back. His eyes were unfocused and were evidently in deep thought about something. Behind him, sulky old men looked down with eyes on their noses and the thoughts in their hearts just like they were statues. "I need an answer," said Gesangjer in a solemn tone after suddenly turning around and casting his sight on the 2 old men. One of the old men slowly raised his head, flipped his eyelids and said, "This is nothing but a risky gamble. Win and our Venom sect will have endless advantages. Lose and we'll be beyond redemption. You're the sect master of our Venom sect, and we shall follow every decision you make. 5th uncle, 6th uncle, your ranks among everyone in our Venom sect are the highest, the only ones from the 8th generation of disciples who have lived to the present. How can I arbitrarily take responsibility for such an important matter?" Gesangjer was so annoyed that he angrily rebuked. "We have yet to be clear about the investigation on Tang Xiu, whether or not he has a dreadful force behind him. Those old codgers may pat their butts and leave, but we have a sect, family, and businesses to be concerned about. We have no path of retreat at all." "Then just wait and see what will happen," said the old man indifferently. "I have a hunch that the game between those cultivators has just started, and it's hard to say who will win or lose. That Jade Beauty told me something the other day, and what she said makes sense to me." "What did she tell you?" asked Gesangjer quickly with a slightly changed expression. "One who is true to his heart will prepare himself for both eventualities," said the old man. "You mean," said Gesangjer, staring with amazement. "Yeah. Our Venom sect is said to have no qualifications to mix our feet in the matter, so why not pull us out of the predicament and benefit from both sides? Those 8 families in the strange doors put all their eggs in one basket and staked everything to unleash all their power to help Jin Sanqi and Jin Sijie. Those 8 fogies all ultimately died in the fight along with many of their elites. And the result? I never believed that Jin Sanqi and Jin Sijie would easily impart cultivation techniques to those 8 families. I feel that you should secretly send someone to search for Tang Xiu and pass on the news that these master and disciples are here to him. With his intelligence, wisdom, and abilities, Tang Xiu should be able to understand that we are showing him goodwill. From the bout between these cultivators, we can obtain friendship from Tang Xiu if we win and may get unexpected benefits by spending little. We won't have anything to affect us if he is to lose either. Gesangger's eyes turned extraordinarily bright as he praised while raising his thumb, "You really are experienced and astute. Fifth uncle. You intentionally kept me guessing all the while in this matter. There can't be any idea better than this one. I'll send someone to contact Tang." He had yet to finish what he wanted to speak as a car's headlights from the front gate of the hunting grounds shone on the small building's windows, where they were in. The trio quickly moved to look outside the window. Who could be this late? Gesangger knitted his brows and spoke in a whisper. The old man who just spoke raised his brows and thoughtfully said, "We must never step out of this room regardless of how big the incident is. Just like what we just discussed, we'll wait and see." "Fifth uncle, you mean?" "It's Tang Xiu who's coming," commented Gesangger, amazed. "Just look down there. You'll know," said the old man. Bang. The hunting grounds front gate was hit by the Wrangler SUV as it roared and rushed into the hunting grounds. Four security guards in the security room who had just rushed out from the post were silently knocked down and dragged back into the security room, whereas the car continued and stopped in front of the guest building. Tang Xiu and Old Blind then got off together. Daoist Qiankuan Old Fogey, Jin Sanqi, and Eugene Sijie. "You, master and disciples, are tortoises, get the fuck out and see this father. Else I'll destroy this small building and make you eat some ashes." Tang Xiu grabbed the spirit spear and instantly released his spiritual sense to lock on the master and disciples trio inside the house. Shitty bastard. Daoist Qiankuan, who was currently healing himself, was a bit angry as he instantly opened his eyes and smashed the window. His figure instantly appeared in front of Tang Xiu and the others. Even the elites of the 8 families and forces of strange doors also came out from the building and stood behind Daoist Qiankuan and his disciples. Tang Xiu sized up Daoist Qiankuan a few times and sneered, "Old fart as you are, you should have died rather than staying alive. Living for more than 200 years and yet unexpectedly so shameless to scheme against my men. Are you really that tired of living your crooked life?" Daoist Qiankuan squinted his eyes and carefully examined Tang Xiu, and then immediately replied unhurriedly, "Are you Tang Xiu?" "Yes," said Tang Xiu bluntly. As if looking at a dead man, Daoist Qiankuan shook his head and immediately shifted his sight toward Old Blind and sighed. "Seems like you really have become a running dog for this little punk, Old Blind. If it wasn't that I had to treat my disciple's injury, how would I allow you to escape last night? And yet, to my surprise, you actually acted recklessly and blindly delivered yourself to me? Don't blame me for resorting to cruel and malicious means." Old Blind fell silent for a short while and then slowly replied. This Tang Xiu kid did not heed to this Old Blind's advice and was adamant on coming here to exact his revenge. Since I'll need his help in the future, I naturally can't leave him by himself. I will just lose my life here at the worst, but I'll be sure to drag you with me. Tang Xiu slightly pressed his brows and lightly said, "Old Blind, you're not allowed to act unless I can't hold on anymore." "But Tang Xiu, you," Old Blind shouted in a low voice. "Keep your mouth shut if you want me to provide a place for you to spend your old age in the future." Tang Xiu waved his hand to interrupt her and said in a deep voice, "I have my own reasons in doing this." With that said, he crazily fed the Black Spirit long spear with his primal chaos force. He had refined this long spear for many days, and to his surprise, this long spear was definitely an excellent weapon as he was able to erupt 50% of this spear's might with his current cultivation, which was very good in and of itself. Evanescent chart, infinite spear array. Tang Xiu's body soared upward and a raging flame suddenly burst out from the spirit spear, as he used the long spear to inscribe the patterns of an array in the air. After throwing the long spear into the air, the array instantly formed and was also activated at once. Layers of illusionary spear images formed an array within a 100 meters radius, and the surging airwaves forced Old Blind, Moa and the others back for dozens of steps, directly separating them from the spear range. Spear as array and I as the source. Tang Xiu instantly appeared in the core position and his primal chaos force constantly rushed out crazily, instantly turning the area of 100 meters around into a surging sea of flames. Offensive array art? Daoist Qianquan's complexion greatly changed, while Jin Sanqi and Jin Sijie's faces were that of horror and dread. The array was a field the master and disciples trio had no knowledge of and only knew a minute bit. Never in their wildest dreams did they think there would actually be someone in this world who was able to arrange an array with such a method. In a flash, the sky, earth, and the very world changed in the eyes of these master and disciples' eyes. Even the dozens of elites of the strange doors who were also enveloped in the spear array suddenly found that the world before them was as though had turned into the Ashura hell. Fire serpents, fire birds, fire drakes, fire phoenixes. Countless lifelike species were as though coming to life, as magma from beneath the earth surged upward, plunging towards them with whooshing sounds. Layers of shadows were like streams of light that constantly moved around them. The whole world was shrouded by the looming destructive aura descending from the firmament as an enormous invisible pressure also enveloped them in an instant. Arg! A miserable scream came from the mouth of a strange door's elite as a thin fire serpent suddenly drilled out of the boiling rock and plunged towards him, piercing his foot and drilling into his body straight to his heart. The sharp pain consumed his bracing soul as the miserable screams he let out made various kinds of flame creatures storm toward him. They dismembered his body and divided his flesh. In just a few breaths, that strange door's elite was fully consumed, and not even a trace of his bones was left. The remaining strange doors people did not fare much better as the number of flame creatures was too many to count and quickly killed them. Outside the array, though Old Blind was unable to see anything with her eyes, these particularly unusual parallel images were reflected in her mind. Experienced and knowledgeable she may be, yet never did she dream that she would one day see living humans struggling so desperately while whining and screaming so miserably. As their muscles suddenly vanished, bones disappeared, and blood evaporated. Ultimately, their whole being was completely erased from existence. Moa and the experts of the Everlasting Feast Hall, as well as Gassanger and the two old men who were watching through the windows in the distance with military binoculars, all of them witnessed these uncanny scenes with dread and fear. The feet went missing, legs gone, head vanished, and arms disappeared, until the whole being of a person ultimately evanesced. Tang Xiu sneered inwardly. These people from the strange doors had decided to stand behind Daoist Qianquan and his disciples, and thus keeping them alive would only leave a disaster to him in the future. He might as well take this opportunity to directly erase all of them so as to avoid future troubles. Daoist Qianquan Old Fart, Jin Sanqi, and you, Jin Sijie. Your dogs all are dead now, leaving only the three of you, master and disciples. Enjoy this treat very well. If you three can break this array, don't you worry about that, for I will make you taste the goodness of more savage means. Inside the array, Daoist Qianquan did not utter anything and neither did he act rashly. He quietly observed the world inside the array despite being extremely shocked inwardly, because this array was something he had never seen before despite his master once telling him in his childhood that such a formation indeed existed in this world. The two brothers, Jin Sanqi and Jin Sijie, also did not act rashly. The two fogies were all over 100 years old and were also old freak cultivators. Who the hell are you, Tang Xiu? Finally, Jin Sanqi could not bear it and shout. He was able to hear Tang Xiu's voice clearly and was sure that it worked the other way around as well. However, just as his voice sounded, countless illusionary flame creatures around him howled and stormed toward him. Even the magma surging out from beneath at this moment jettisoned out to the sky to sweep over him. A queer expression could be seen in Tang Xiu's eyes as he laughed loudly and shouted, "Who am I? I'm someone you find difficult to deal with and nearly impossible for you to imagine. Your death is imminent, so just go to the infernal hell and be a muddled ghost there." Chapter 679, Sparing All the Future Troubles. As an expert who was half a step away from Golden Core stage, Jin Sanqi was still unfazed despite being trapped inside an array and facing the crises before him. He blasted out his true essence and conjured small magic arts to constantly destroy the flame creatures, and his powerful attacks cleaved layer upon layer of spear shadows. The momentum may be great, but its power is too weak. Jin Sanchi revealed a bit of contempt as his counterattacking strength turned more violent. Meanwhile, Jin Sijia also began to fight with those flame creatures and evaded the dangers from the impaling and sweeping spear shadows several times. He did not fight as relaxedly as Jin Sanchi since he was, after all, seriously injured at present. Though the residual efficacy of the holy healing medicine inside his body was still there, the effect on him was not particularly significant. Striking to kill and smashing to destroy. And yet, Jin Sijia's injuries turned more serious and worsened. At the moment when two fire serpents wrapped around his feet, a spear shadow finally impaled his waist. He bellowed in rage as the impaling wound on his waist gave him a devastating blow, while countless more flame creatures and spear shadows followed behind. "Brother, avenge me." Blood was flowing from Jin Sijia's 7 orifices, but it then evaporated in the heat wave. His strong-built body finally fell to the magma at the side and, despite his hard iron-like body, the magma still engulfed him and eventually left no residue of his existence. Sijia. Jin Sanchi clearly heard his young brother's shrill cry and his heart was as though falling into an ice hole. The anger and hatred made his face twist, and a devastating power blasted out from his hands and feet as it swept over the flame creatures around him. Even the spear shadows kicked by him were blasted backward for dozens of meters before exploding. Daoist Qianquan, on the other hand, had yet to move from the beginning. He just allowed however many flame creatures came to crawl onto his body, and yet he stood ramrod like a stone in his spot. Through observation and conjecture, he found that as long as he did not move and stayed silent, those flame creatures would not actively attack him. Even those spear shadows also just flew around at random and seemingly had no target. However, the shrill cry of his disciple made his heart shake. Finally, along with his trembling body, the crawling flame creatures around his body exploded one after another. The momentum of the explosions was even more direct as everything within a dozen meters was blown up by the rolling airwaves, thrown to the distance and blown to smithereens. I must break through. Forcefully break through. Power and strength were upheld firmly by Daoist Qianquan. He believed that in the face of absolute power, any obstacles could be pulled, withered, and destroyed in a violent manner. He instantly released the golden core inside his body, as his surging true essence then flowed like a torrential river and shot out his golden core along with it against the air in front of him, with a loud bang. Boom. Ripples were bursting inside the blazing world and the surroundings, as some dreadful cracks appeared amidst the undulating ripple in the middle layer of the air. But the instant after, the cracks healed themselves and the swaying ripples gradually faded away. Daoist Qianquan's complexion turned a bit nasty. He had tried his best, and yet he failed to destroy this array by relying on pure strength. He could not accept it. I want to see how long you can support this array. As Daoist Qianquan forced out a mouthful of blood essence, a circle of true fire then suddenly rose from the golden core that was enveloped by an amount enormous of true essence. As the momentum continued to soar, he slammed it against the air in front of him once again. This time, the ripples in the surrounding air were more intense and the cracks were wider than a while ago, and yet, the array was still recovering just like previously despite the violent quake. Just fucking break. 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 Repeated successive attacks followed by successive explosions. The blazing world in front kept quaking as a crack in the corrugated air continued to increase. As the number of bombardments increased, the blazing world seemed about to be blown away to pieces at any time, and so was the spear array. At the core of the array, Tang Xiu's complexion was somewhat ugly. Although he went all out to release his primal chaos force to feed the array, Daoist Qianquan's attacks were really too strong. Despite having gone all out to control it, the array still had a tendency to be broken. He hardened himself and flipped his hands to take out 5 raging flame and lightning talismans, the only remaining offensive talismans he had left. Kill. He slightly opened his lips to shout. With the control of his mind, 5 Raging Flame and 4 Lightning Talismans appeared. 2 Raging Flame and 1 Lightning Talismans instantly appeared around Jin Sanchi and exploded, giving him severe injuries, whereas the remaining 3 Raging Flame and 3 Lightning Talismans instantly appeared around Daoist Qianquan, and directly enveloped him within along with the Sea of the Flame formation. Dozens of lightning bolts then bombarded him in an instant. Daoist Qianquan once again forced out a mouthful of blood essence. He could feel his internal organs were injured and in a mess after the impact from the bombardment. The burning sensation caused him to suffocate and the scars of wounds strung together like beads, leaving his body badly tattered, bloody, and bruised. And yet, the ferocious nature inside him was thoroughly aroused at this moment. While chanting an incantation in a somewhat shaky voice, he integrated his blood essence into his golden core. Nearly bordering on betting his life at stake and going berserk, he plunged forward and blasted out everything he had in an instant. Crack. The spear array was like a glass breaking to pieces and disintegrated in the blink of an eye. Tang Xiu, who was in the core position inside the array, withstood the sudden outburst with his body, and the backlash from the array caused him to spurt out a mouthful of blood. If it wasn't for his extremely formidable body, the force from the backlash was enough to make his body explode. However, this kind of injury was nothing but a common thing he was used to, and he still remained cool-headed in such a downcast situation. His figure instantly flashed as he disappeared and reappeared in a flash in front of the badly tattered and riddled with scars Jin Sanchi, who looked a bit dull and distracted. Puff. Dazzling light erupted from Blood Guzzler as his head flew in an instant. Jin Sanchi, who was half a step away from breaking through to the golden core stage, had his eyes staring wide like a copper bell. He saw the world spinning around, watching his headless body and a column of blood spurting out from its neck. Beyond 100 meters away. Old Blind's divine sense had been enveloping the field of activity all along, and she clearly saw the entire combat scene. When the array was broken, Tang Xiu shot forward all of a sudden and killed Jin Sanchi much to her shock. That was difficult to believe despite how experienced she was. Jin Sanchi's strength was evidently slightly stronger than that of Jin Sijia's. Tang Xiu was still young. Even if he did rely on the array, wasn't it next to impossible to kill Jin Sijia and follow to kill Jin Sanchi? Moo Jin Shi, and the rest were shocked but also looked frantic and fervent. They looked at Tang Xiu with worshipping expressions and loudly shouted, "Long live!" Tang Xiu's performance impressed them very much. But inside the small building in the distance, Gesangjer and the 2 old men were tongue-tied and dumbfounded, as though they were seeing something unbelievable. Jin Sijia, as well as Jin Sanchi, died along with the remaining tens of elites of the strange doors? Suddenly, Gesangjer felt very fortunate inwardly, rejoicing that did not involve himself in this incident. Else he and the 2 elders, and even the entire younger generations of Venom sect would die without a burial ground. And yet, he too felt a tinge of regret since he could have sold a favor if Tang Xiu and the others were to arrive later. Tang Xiu moved and acted quickly, and his timing in seizing the opportunity was very ingenious. Even Daoist Qianquan was unable to react as Jin Sanchi was directly beheaded. At this moment, despite having been through countless storms and waves in his life, Daoist Qianquan was still grieved and wept. He received and raised those 2 disciples nearly all his life and they were rapidly progressing and nearly stepped into the golden core stage, and yet, they were slain just like this. This was undoubtedly a sharp knife that sheared his heart. "I'll kill you!" Daoist Qianquan roared, causing the luster of his golden core to turn extremely dim and its entire body to shrink in half. But he still controlled it and frantically stormed towards Tang Xiu. He could never vent the hatred inside his heart if he did not slay this punk. He couldn't care less whether he would be devastatingly injured if he kept engaging in this intense and bitter combat. For there was only one though amidst his berserk mind, kill Tang Xiu and avenge my disciples. You still need to cultivate for hundreds of years if you want to kill me. Tang Xiu laughed loudly, his figure plunged forward like a sharp arrow to greet the explosive bombardment of the golden core. Vigorous and intense primal chaos force crazily poured into his arms and blasted toward the bombarding golden core. Old Blind, who was 100 meters away, had her expression greatly changed and shouted with a horrified expression, "Don't." Kaboom! Tang Xiu's body was blasted backward for dozens of steps, spurting out a bloody mist as he tried to stabilize his staggering body. Despite having a very formidable body, his finger phalanxes were still broken and his whole fist was covered with blood. Almost as soon as he stopped, he collected the spirit-long spear and shot it straight towards Daoist Shenkuan and instantly impaled the Daoists through the back. How is this possible? With his 7 orifices bleeding, Daoist Shenkuan looked down at the hole in his chest. His golden core was exploded and destroyed after the clash with Tang Xiu's explosive fist. The backlash left him with a grave injury that he could hardly withstand. And yet, adding insult to injury, his chest and heart were directly hit and his life force was unceasingly decreasing. Cough cough. Tang Xiu's complexion was devoid of color. After coughing up 2 mouthfuls of blood, he looked up to Daoist Shenkuan and sneered. I may be inferior to you in regards to cultivation level, but what I'm mastering is fleshly body cultivation, and my physical body and constitution are 10 times stronger than yours. Daoist Shenkuan, remember my words. Don't become my adversary in your next life. Is there even a next life? Muttered Daoist Shenkuan. With that said, his body crashed into the ground and he drew his last breath. Tang Xiu could not help but respond with a bleak smile. He turned to Old Blind, Mo, and the others, who were quickly rushing toward him. He immediately flung his wrist and lightly smiled, I'm fine. It's just a slight injury. Killing these master and disciples indeed consumed quite the energy and effort, but removing them means we won't have extra worries. Tang Xiu, how can you be so strong? Muttered Old Blind. That old fart was a powerhouse at the Golden Core stage, an old freak who had lived for 200+ years. And yet, you're still so young that you couldn't have cultivated for that long, right? Nothing is impossible in this world, replied Tang Xiu with a smile. Daoist Shenkuan and his disciples may have a very high cultivation level, but their combat techniques were just appalling. Even if I did not fight him directly, I still had countless ways to kill him, though it may have taken some more energy and effort to achieve that. Old Blind fell silent. She could not see through Tang Xiu completely. Tang Xiu slowly looked up and then shifted his vision towards the small building in the distance. Gesangjer, as the owner of this hunting ground, shouldn't you greet your guest or something? Chapter 680, Pledging Allegiance. Inside another 2-story small building, Gesangjer's breathing stagnated. As he turned to look at the 2 old men, he saw them nodding at him at the same time. After a while, Gesangjer appeared in front of Tang Xiu and the others along with the 2 old men. He glanced at the dead bodies on the ground as a complicated look could be seen in his eyes. He then forced out a smile and said, I never expected you to be a cultivator, Mr. Tang, and neither did I expect that you would have such a formidable strength. It seems that my worry was ungrounded. And neither did I expect that you were a member of the Strange Doors, Proprietor Gesangjer. More so that, your status should be pretty high, am I right? Commented Tang Xiu lightly. I'm the sect master of the Venom sect, but I've never involved myself in the other faction's disputes, bitterly explained Gesangjer. If anything, we've been in Kanas for many years and have never provoked others. Mr. Tang, if you are annoyed and unhappy with the people from the Strange Doors, please do not direct your anger toward our Venom sect. Daoist Shenkuan, Jin Sanqi, and Jin Sijie insisted to stay here, while I did not have the guts nor the ability to drive them away. In today's society, covering up others' crimes is also considered as being guilty before the law, don't you think? Said Tang Xiu with a smile. Gesangjer spread his hands and said, I beg your forgiveness, Mr. Tang. You would not stoop down to our level, ignorant and less informed people, would you? It's easy, said Tang Xiu with a faint smile. I'm very much resentful for the fact that Jin Sanqi and Jin Sijia were able to beguile the forces under the strange doors, and bossed them around. If you can make up for their previous faults and remove all those forces, I won't hold you accountable anymore. Gesangjer's expression moved as he suddenly cupped his fists and replied, Gesangjer is willing to serve you, Mr. Tang. Serve me? Didn't he just want to expiate himself and make up for his faults with merits? Tang Xiu's mind turned sharp. Despite knowing perfectly well what Gesangjer's intention was, he let out a faint smile, stretched out 3 fingers and slowly said, 3 years. If your Venom Sect's deeds and actions can satisfy me within these 3 years, I don't mind making you go on a step further. Is it like an internship period? Gesangjer's eyes lit up and with a bit of excitement, he replied respectfully, I, Gesangjer, along with the entire Venom Sect behind me, will forever serve and work for Mr. Tang in the future. Regardless of whatever you order us to do, we will definitely do our best to achieve it as long as it is within our capabilities. A smile outlined on the corner of Tang Xiu's mouth as he nodded and said, Then your first task is to completely exterminate all the people from the strange doors who participated in this incident. His name is Mo Ao, and I'll instruct him to lead a few men of mine to stay here to aid you. I hope all of them have already reported to the King of Hell 10 days later. Affirmative. Gesangjer did not know the degree of strength possessed by Mo Ao's group. Yet he presumed that they were also cultivators given the fact that they could follow Tang Xiu. With the help from several cultivators, it would simply be a breeze to eradicate those 8 families. Afterward, Tang Xiu did not hurry to leave but stayed on the hunting ground to heal himself. Although his injury was not severe, it was not light either. Especially the backlash caused by the explosion of the spear array that made him feel the burning pain from his internal organs. If he did not heal himself as early as possible, it would probably leave a latent danger to himself. At noon the next day, just as Tang Xiu came out of the room, Mo Ao told him that Old Blind had already left, leaving a message to Mo Ao to be conveyed to him that she would go to the Shanghai's Everlasting Feast Hall in June this year to find him. Boss, the Venom Sect is all done with the preparation and are ready to proceed. At lunchtime, Gesangjer arrived in a hurry. Then, it's time to start since you've already prepared, said Tang Xiu. And remember, do not leave any latent dangers behind, and neither must you create too much noise. Besides, the present time is kind of a new society, to begin with. Gesangjer nodded with a prudent expression. In fact, Tang Xiu did not even need to remind him as he was also aware of how he should do the job. Under the current circumstances, the media had quick access to information and were well informed. And what his Venom Sect was adept at was assassination with poison, killing while remaining invisible. Boss, those 8 families and forces of the Strange Door have a very big power as far as I know. How should we manage the aftermath after we're done killing them? Asked Jinshi all of a sudden. Tang Xiu looked at him with an unusual expression and suddenly grinned, Oh, I think Jinshi is quite good and smart. All right, I think he's suitable to be in charge of the matters here. As for you, go back with me. Mo Ao was valiant and brave, yet was slightly lacking in thinking things through. Upon hearing the question from Jinshi, he too realized that he overlooked the matter of how to manage the aftermath and thus let out a hollow laugh and nodded without speaking. Tang Xiu then continued, Jinshi, call my grandfather personally if some government officials are involved in this matter. I think he can solve it. In the case that it involves someone from the business community, you can call Kong Xia in person and she'll handle that for you. Do remember, the killing must be done, and you must not be soft-hearted. Affirmative, replied Jinshi respectfully before he turned around and left. In the evening, Tang Xiu went to Jia Weili's horse ranch in Kaunas. After Jia Weili welcomed him, he then got out of the car and said with a smile, Brother Jia, I just felt that I must dine in your place tonight. You're most welcome, said Jia Weili with a clear voice and a smiling face. Tang Xiu nodded and smiled in response. As he walked inside, he said, to make nothing of the hardships you endured, I troubled you to venture deep into the forested mountains this time, brother Jia. I can't express my gratitude with words, so I'll just gift you something big after we're done dinning. Please consider it as a token of my gratitude. Brother Tang, we are friends, you don't need to be overly courteous, said Jia Weili sternly. What I like about you is neither your money nor possessions, but you as a person. The thing I'm going to gift you is not something money can buy. Tang Xiu shook his head. All right, please don't refuse it, and let's just finish the meal first. All right, I'll tell them to get it prepared now. Jia Weili was somewhat looking forward to it. He already knew that Tang Xiu was a cultivator, and therefore felt that the gift Tang Xiu wanted to give to him was probably something that countless people could only dream of obtaining, as expected. Tang Xiu imparted him a basic cultivation technique to cultivate qi after dinner. The technique could not lead an ordinary person to be called as a cultivator, but it was still able to prolong his lifespan and strengthen his body, nonetheless. Furthermore, it was very easy to practice this cultivation technique, and Tang Xiu even gave Jia Weili a prescription to let him obtain medicinal herbs according to it and consume as a medicated diet. With all this done, as Jia Weili was feeling grateful, Tang Xiu led Immortal and left the horse ranch and quickly rushed to the airport. What made him helpless was that all the flights from Kana's airport were cancelled due to bad weather. Tang Xiu did not want to waste time here and therefore took a bus with Mo and rushed to the North Xinjiang train station overnight. All the train tickets have been sold out, boss. Mo came out of the ticket booth looking a bit helpless. It just after the New Year celebration, thus it was rush time for students and migrant workers to leave their hometowns and return to their school and work. It's 2 in the morning now, and it seems like we can only stay here. Let's find a hotel nearby to spend the night and then leave tomorrow morning, said Tang Xiu. Mo silently nodded. But then, a glint suddenly flashed in his eyes and he hurriedly said, I may have another way to buy a train ticket, boss. Just wait a bit. Tang Xiu watched Mo leave quickly and spoke to a few furtive young men in the corner a dozen meters away. He handed over a few paper bills and then returned back with 2 train tickets, saying, Boss, those guys are ticket scalpers. But we'll need to transfer to another transportation means in Ning province, nonetheless. After boarding the train, Tang Xiu and Mo arrived in Ning province in the evening. Fortunately, the ticket they bought was in couchette car, so they did not feel tired at all. Afterward, the duo rushed to Ning province airport without pausing to rest. After successfully buying the flight tickets, they then boarded the plane to Shanghai smoothly. Strange, how come no one is here? Tang Xiu and Mo were surprised after boarding the plane since there were no passengers there at all. Other than the 4 flight attendants, the entire cabin was empty. The flight has been cancelled due to the weather, sir. However, the issue has been lifted due to the changes in the weather as well, but the passengers who originally booked the seats have already been refunded. The 2 sirs may have to wait for a while since there's still half an hour left for 4 flights to take off. Also, there should be some more passengers boarding later, one of the elegant flight attendants answered. Tang Xiu understood in a flash. After taking a seat according to the ticket number, he then waited quietly. Hello, sir. There are a lot of passengers here, and I like sitting by the window. May I ask whether we can exchange seats? A pleasant voice sounded, as a woman with an alluring figure and wearing a veil stood in the aisle next to Mo and asked him. Exchange seats? Mo furrowed his brows and quickly glanced around the cabin. What made him secretly vigilant was that the total passengers that boarded the plane were only 5 people. This also included the woman next to him. Tang Xiu, who sat by the window with his eyes shut, also heard her voice, as he opened his eyes to look around and found the same issue. Oh, pick any seat in the back, said Tang Xiu calmly after glancing at the veiled female. All right, replied Mo and quickly took a seat in the back row. Tang Shou calmly watched as the veiled woman took a seat and also smelled the fragrance she exuded out. He then let out a light smile and said, "Sure enough, it really is a small world, isn't it, Miss Shui?" The saying does have its own truth. Shui Yu's eyes curved and let out a smile as she replied, "The old ancestress told me that you'd take this flight to Shanghai. It just so happened that I need to go to Shanghai as well to find my fiancé, and we happen to bump into each other." "What is it? Don't you want me to sit next to you, Mr. Tang? Your fiancé? Is it Chu Yuan?" asked Tang Shou. "Actually, I've seen that fiancé of mine," said Shui Yu, shaking her head. "Huh?" Tang Shou was surprised. "Where is he?" "Far from the horizon and yet right here under my nose," said Shui Yu with a smile. "Do you really not know? Or are you intentionally playing the fool?" Tang Shou pointed his finger at his nose and said incredulously, "You mean, me? Is there anyone else besides you in front of me?" asked Shui Yu back with a smile. Tang Shou rolled his eyes at her and snappily said, "Miss Shui, you can eat whatever food you want, but don't speak nonsensical things randomly. The room in my home has already been occupied by someone else, and I have no interest to hear such a joke. Had I been unaware of your true identity, I may not be sure that you're the first man who ever saw my face." Shui Yu shook her head. "Mr. Tang. No, I should call you Tang Shou. Addressing you with this name feels kinda intimate, right? Anyways, did I speak incorrectly that you've already seen my face back when we were in Star City, Tang Shou?"